Time to review the Nikon D500. This is the long-awaited successor to the D300. Could this be the best DX camera on the market? Let's take a closer look. This is the Nikon D500 body, and on it I have my trusty 18-200 zoom lens. I've been using this Nikon lens for years and I love it. So this is my lens of choice to test out the body. Now before we get underway, just want to let you know my environment, where I'm at. We got a little wind out here, we have a lot of sun, and I'm back in a wooded area at a local park. It's a relatively small park, but it kind of explains why it might be a little dark and why you might be getting some of the light on my face. So with that said, if you hear some wind, I apologize for that in advance. What I've done is I've taken a lot of notes here, and I've been looking forward to testing this camera for quite a while. So let me just lay out the game plan of what I want to accomplish and what I want to do today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk about the features of this camera. I've picked out a bunch of them and I feel that they're noteworthy, to some extent anyway, and we're going to discuss those. I'm going to kind of point those out. We're going to talk about them. And then I want to do some field testing with this camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to take some landscape photography, some action shots, and some low light shots where we can really test out the ISO of this camera. When all that's said and done, I want to talk about the pros and the cons of the camera and also talk about the cost, because this camera body is relatively expensive in my opinion. And then I'm going to close with my overall thoughts. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump right in and start talking about the features. This camera is a crop sensor camera. Now I've shot with full sensors and the crops, and unless you're doing enormous prints, I feel that technology today with the crop sensors is more than adequate for what most people need. Now that's just my opinion. So with this being a crop sensor body, I'm really excited to see how this handles higher ISOs. That's usually the challenge when you deal with crop sensors. With the full sensors, you can jack the ISO way up if you really want to increase your shutter speed, and typically this is the case in relatively low light situations. If you have a lot of light outside and you're trying to grab an action shot where you really need to freeze the motion, chances are your crop sensor is going to be fine, depending on what you want your shutter speed to be. So nonetheless, we have a crop sensor camera here, and this camera is good to 21 megapixels, which I think is sufficient, and that's fine. Storage media. So let's talk about that for just a minute. This has, let's see if we can open this up. It has two storage cards on it right here. And most Nikons do, all the Nikons I've used, and the one I've used for many years is the Nikon D500, has had two slots, which is great. If you ever have a problem with one card, you can simply replicate it to the other, and it's having a backup within the camera, which is awesome. One notable about this, though, is that these slots are a bit different. One is an XQD slot, and the other one is an SD slot. I don't know why they didn't keep them the same, but that is a noteworthy consideration. Continuous shooting, it'll shoot at 10 frames per second, which I think that's great for the Nikon lineup. The monitor on the back is touch sensitive, and it measures in at 3.2 inches diagonal. It has 5 levels of brightness to it, and it is touch sensitive. So if we take a look at this monitor on the back, you'll see it tilts as well, and you can see this right here. Now this is really, really helpful. I've had many occasions where I've been in crowds of people and I want to get that shot where I'm holding the camera up high, and basically I'm just shooting blind. When you have a monitor that articulates like this and down, you can actually hold the camera up high, look at the monitor, and get the shot you want. And as well, if you want to get a low angle shot, you can turn the monitor like this. You can put the camera down low where you're not having to lay on the ground to compose your image. So I really do like this. One notable about this is the monitor does not flip forward. It doesn't flip up high enough, and it cannot flip sideways, so that if you did want to get a self-composition, you're not going to be able to do this with this monitor right here. Now, I did mention this is touch sensitive. One notable is you cannot touch through the menus. That's not a huge thing to me, but it is noteworthy. You can still pinch to zoom, and you can swipe, and it is very responsive, I think. It feels a lot like what you might experience with a cell phone. So I think that's good. Weighs in at 1.9 pounds. It is 5.8 inches wide, 4.6 inches high, and 3.2 inches deep. What's interesting to me is that I've been shooting the Nikon D7000 for quite a while, and if you've shot in the 7000 range, you go to pick this up right here, and this camera body is it's beefy. It's bigger than my 7000, and it feels much like a professional camera. I really like the feel of this camera, but just noteworthy considerations regarding the size and the weight. It does feel a little heavier. Now, keep in mind, I have a heavier lens on here as well. Shutter speed is 1/8,000th of a second, and all the way down to 30 seconds. You can always go bulb mode if you want. Now, this is supposed to have a quiet shutter release and a continuous quiet shutter release. We'll take a closer look at that later. It will do, as I mentioned, 10 frames per second in continuous high, and it will do 3 frames per second in continuous quiet. So if you want to enable the quiet mode, you're going to get, from a continuous perspective, 3 frames per second. It has a 200 shot buffer for raw images, which is great. Now, that 200 shot buffer is good for the XQD card. The ISO range is from 100 to 51,200, and that's good. Now, it has expanded ISO capabilities to go down to 50 and all the way up to 1,640,000. I don't think I would ever use that, but I guess it's there in case you want it. We can take a look at that and maybe test it out. I suspect that is not an image anyone would use, but if maybe if you're in complete darkness, that might be an option for you. It does have a built-in noise reduction, but I do prefer to handle my noise reduction in post-processing. This features the same 153-point autofocus system and RGB metering system of the professional full-frame D5. Now, if you know anything about the D5, you know the cost on that, and it is many times more expensive. But it is an interesting, noteworthy fact that they share the same sensor, so that's good. Since this is a DX camera, something to think about is that the autofocus system covers more of the frame. So because the frame is going to be smaller than that of a full frame, and you have the same focusing system, it is almost covering full left to right of that sensor, which is great. The video mode, it'll shoot 4K. Now, it'll shoot 4K at 24, 25, and 30 frames a second. It will not go 60 frames on 4K, just something to note. You can shoot 1080p at 24, 25, 30, 50, and 60. Now, I shoot 1080p at 60 to get some good slow motion. So that's what I like to do with that. If you want, you can go 720p, which it will do at 50 and 60 frames a second. Also has built-in Wi-Fi, NFC, and Bluetooth, which is kind of cool. So if you're that type of person where you like to take your pictures and then shoot them up to Instagram, or you want to tweet them out, or Facebook, or what have you, it's kind of nice to have that. Has a built-in mic and the headphones, which are kind of cool. Battery is rated at 1,240 shots, and it does have a weatherproof seal. Now, my D7000 is weatherproof as well, and I love that. So that's a nice little feature here. Now, there is no low-pass filter, which means sharper images. I'm happy to see that Nikon pulled that off this camera, and so a result should be sharper images because it lacks that. And it's the same thing that the Nikon D5 has. So the Nikon D5 also lacks that filter, which is great. There is no built-in flash, which is kind of funny if you look at that. I shouldn't say it's kind of funny. Actually, your professional cameras typically do not have the built-in flash. Even if it had it, I probably wouldn't use it unless I'm in an extreme pinch and I need a little bit of light, and then I would probably try to diffuse it or bounce it in some crazy way. One other notable, this is my last notable, is that the back buttons illuminate. Now it's daylight out, so we really can't see it here, but perhaps if I think about it, I'll try to grab this for the review later. But I love the fact that that has that. I think this is the first DX camera in Nikon's line that does have that. So that's an awesome little feature. With all of that said, what I want to do right now is put this camera to the test. We're going to go out and do some field exercises and see just how well it performs. So as I start the field testing, I'm driving around and the first thing I spot is this. And I think this is an old grain silo of some sort. But what really caught my eye is the pattern that I see on the side of this building. I think this will make for a good test as we jump right in. A couple quick notables. One, I'm shooting in RAW. I like RAW, and that's what we're going to shoot in right now. My ISO is also set to 100, and let's start shooting. One thing I'm noticing is just how well this camera tracks with its autofocusing system, and it's really to the left and to the right. Now, I did set up back button focus, which I've used for many years, and I absolutely love it. If you haven't done it, consider doing it. I think it's something you'll really enjoy. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you have it, it's awesome. I'm shooting still objects right now, but I am testing the ability to take that object all the way to the left side of my frame and all the way to the right side. And in this case, I'm all the way to the left and I am at the leftmost edge, and it is just tack sharp and it's locking on. I'm on my way to a local golf course, and I think this is going to be a good spot to try and grab some action photos. I'm going to look for some golfers who are hitting off the range, or if I'm lucky, maybe I can find someone who's going to hit out of the sand. And what I'm going to really go after is, I'm going to go after that 10 frames per second, and I want to see just how well it captures and how well it maintains the focus. And I think while I'm out here, I should be able to get some good landscape shots. So let's dive right in. Because we have such a bright day out, taking photos of a golfer at the range made it very nice and easy. I bumped my ISO up quite a bit just so I can get that shutter speed at 1/4,000th, maybe 1/5,000th of a second or even higher. And it really makes for some tack sharp images. Now I have some time to turn my focus on a little landscape photography. I'm out on the golf course now, and I am using the 3D focusing system, and I want to show you on what. There are a lot of geese around, and let's pull up here. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. One challenge is that I notice when the geese are walking around, the focal point seems to jump, perhaps from one animal to the other, and it might be just because they share similar patterns and colors, and when they walk in front of each other, it causes that focal point to jump around. Time to test the interval option on this camera, but before I do, I want to make one quick note. If you're in the movie menu mode and you do not see an option for the interval, chances are you don't have the date and time set on your camera, so ensure you have that set and you should see the option. Time for a little street photography. I'm in a relatively small downtown area, and the main strip is out there, so I'm going to head out right now, and I'm going to make use of the articulating screen, and the sun's starting to go down a bit, so I suspect we'll need to adjust the ISO, and we'll see just what kind of photos we can get. Time to test the low light capabilities of this camera. For this exercise, I've decided to move inside. It is pitch black outside right now, and inside I can control the light a little better. And I'm going to use this caricature right here, Shrek. And I'm going to turn the lights down little by little, and I'm going to raise the ISO. And we're going to see just how well this camera performs. camera's capable of shooting video at 720, 1080, and 4K. Let's run through some simple video tests right now and see just how well it works. Time to talk about the pros, the cons, and give you my final thoughts on this camera. This camera was a beast, and I've enjoyed shooting with it without a doubt. I made a list of pros and cons, and I wanted to be sure I didn't forget anything as I went along. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to talk about the pros to begin with. The shutter's rated at 200,000 actuations. The autofocus sensor's awesome. I talked about this briefly before, but this has the same autofocus sensor as the D5. The D5 is a full sensor, and with this being a crop, it does a much better job at going left to right. I found the 3D tracking capabilities solid and fun to use. The trick is to ensure that you put the point that's identified for the 3D tracker on top of your subject, and it will retain that. Now, when I was trying to retain focus on the geese at the golf course, I think when the geese overlapped each other, it got a little confused, but that can happen. Nonetheless, I felt that it worked pretty well overall. This camera is loaded with options when it comes to the interval timer. It will show you the amount of time that's needed for the setup that you've selected for your intervals. And I really like that. Not only does it show it to you in the camera before you start the time lapse, but if you look at the top of the display on the camera while it's shooting the time lapse, it will show you in minutes how much is left. I did film a 4K clip for 29 minutes, and the only thing I noticed is that the back of the camera over to the right, about where your thumb is, maybe a little closer to the LCD, it gets a little warm. It doesn't get hot, just gets warm. Now, after 29 minutes, it used roughly 40% of the battery, which I didn't think was too bad. And because it was warm, not hot, it's not like you're going to fry an egg on it, I think you're going to be fine. If you've seen any of my other videos before, you'll know that the Sony a6000 has an overheating issue. I don't think this camera has any concerns with that. I do feel that this is one of the best DX cameras on the market today with regards to high ISOs and relatively low noise. The reason a lot of folks go with the full sensor, and myself included, is that you can take images in relatively low light with higher ISOs and maintain very little noise. This DX camera, I think, rivals some of those full sensors up to a point. So I will say that the full sensor, just by the sheer size of it, is going to be better off than the DX. But this is one of the best DX on the markets that I've seen, again, dealing with noise and high ISOs. I really like the microphone input here and the headphones. But with that microphone input, you can attach a Rode mic or whatever you want right here and kind of shoot that out. I tend to use lavalier mics, so I don't use this that often, but it is great to have. That is kind of a list of my pros. I'm going to jump in. I do have just a small, relatively small handful on the cons. There's no electronic shutter option in live view, which means there is no true silent mode. If you do need a camera that's going to be relatively quiet, just be advised that this D500 really does not have that option. Focus hunting when shooting video. Now that's the one problem I've had with regards to video and Nikon DSLRs in general. I've tested this out before, and the D500 still has issues when it tries to lock on the focus. And you can see in our video test how it was jumping back and forth. The camera hunts, and you can also pick up on that. You can hear it. So a lot of people doing videos will say, hey, just don't autofocus. You should manual focus. And I do agree with that. I'm just noting that in case you're, if you're thinking that you're just going to shoot family video and you want to put it in autofocus, it's going to hunt and you're going to hear it. This could be a con, it could be a pro, but it is relatively heavy. It's heavier than my D7000, and the pro to that is it feels like a professional camera. I mean, this thing feels like a tank. If I'm going to go into the jungle, I'm going to take this thing with me. It feels good in the hand. It's meaty, and I kind of like it. If you're having to carry it around all day and you're not accustomed to a heavier camera, you might see that as a con. So I don't know. I guess it could go both ways. Let's talk about the cost. The cost of this body is $2,000. Now, this lens right here is an 18-200. Again, the cost of just the body, $2,000. Now, there are some full sensor cameras out there that are close to $2,000 as well, and you might ask yourself, which one would you go with? Well, in my opinion, it really depends on what you're doing, but I feel that Nikon did such an awesome job with this DX camera with regards to handling low light situations, and I'm a big fan of the crop sensor. Why? Because I like the additional reach on my lenses. And if it were me and I had $2,000 to spend, I would go after this Nikon D500. If you found this video helpful, and I hope you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't done so, subscribe to my channel. It's called The Real World. You never know what you might get. For the most part, I record videos about photography and technology, but I also do videos about homeownership and automobile maintenance. So until the next video, take care of yourself and be safe.